There are improvement works ahead, so this train will terminate at the next station.
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
How about that?
Are you Muslim?
He should have been slapped as a child. He's a spoiled little Greek brat who's probably been treated like a prince.
I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Okay, now we're rolling.
It's been a long time since I've been on the podcast.
No, look, I'm actually glad because you came.
Yeah,
you actually came and saw it in Moorabbin.
Correct.
You know what I mean? And that was like the first almost professional sort of setup. 2019.
2019. Yeah, it was 2019, wasn't
I
it?
moved in it was like Mayish, June.
Yeah.
And you were one of the first guests that I had in there once I moved.
And we covered
what were we talking? You were talking about
a lot of different topics.
Actually, incidentally, I think you did. Coincidentally, I think we did discuss the Middle East at some point as well.
I think we did. I think we discussed the Syrian conflict.
Dude.
Yeah, we did. We discussed the Syrian conflict and what to do and what to do about it.
2 years later, we're back at the same thing, like knocking on the door. That's insane.
Yeah.
And especially after the year that we've just had with the fucking pandemic. I actually love your tat, like poking out of your t-shirt.
Ah, thank you.
Now, I've always said it, dude. The placement of your tats. The first time I actually appreciated it was when we went for dinner on like near Gibbs, like near your house. It was at that Mexican joint. We're having tacos and
Jesus.
Is that what it's called?
Hotel Jesus. Yeah.
Is it actually called Jesus?
Jesus. Yeah. Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. There was the one. There was the one time you were wearing like a singlet. It was the first time I'd seen all your ink come together, and I said, "This is the perfect placement,
symmetrical."
Yeah.
Well thought out.
You know what's interesting?
What's that?
You know, in Australia, it's actually illegal to name your son Jesus.
I didn't know that.
I only found out. It wasn't. When did I find out? I can't remember where it was. Someone told me, and it was an industry professional, like that would have known, like that sort of fact. I can't remember who it was, and I said, "But hang on, what if you're Hispanic or Latino?
Yeah.
Like Jesus is the most standard name." I said, "No, if it's spelt Jesus, it's illegal in this country to name your son Jesus."
Just this country?
I think so. I can't remember. It's a fact. I'll check it out.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
Well, you can call a kid Muhammad here.
But that's what I said. I said, well, what about the name Muhammad?
There's the other prophet.
That's equally as, the grandeur behind it.
Well, it is. I mean, they're an equivalence in terms of being poster boys, aren't they, for the religion? So I don't understand why you can't call your child Jesus, but you can call your child Mo or Muhammad.
You're the one freak that calls him Mo.
I call him Mo.
I know, but it's funny.
It is funny because I remember I got into an argument once with someone on Twitter.
Yeah.
We were debating Islam, and someone rather from somewhere in the world, and he said to me, "Show some respect. His name is not Mo; it's Muhammad. He's not your mate from down the street."
That reminds me of when I was in Greek school, and some kid wrote Christos with a tono on the I, so it was Christos.
Ah, yes.
In a Christos.
Christos, bro. Where you put the tono?
It was just, but like, dude, think about how like passe that is. Like a tiny apostrophe, above a vowel is enough to set like a middle-aged Greek man off.
Absolutely, because it's incorrect.
I would have been, dude. I'll tell you. I can probably narrow down how the teacher we had. Our grade 6 teacher was Kiria Yanni. So then Kiria Anna. So I was probably grade 4.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak out of line. Could be grade 4, grade 5. So I would have been like 10, 11 years old. And like the teacher lost his shit because someone used the word Christos instead of Christos. Nevertheless, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the reason why I brought you in and I explained this to you is because people started asking me about the current conflict with Hamas and Israel. And I don't have all the facts. I don't. I know a bit about it.
It's a big topic. There's a lot of information. Yeah.
I know a bit about it. But I know that you know a lot about it.
Yeah.
And I want you to explain basically how it began. All right. I know you have your own opinion, which is fine.
But this is what are you laughing at?
Look, we're not discussing. Okay. This is the thing.
Yeah.
You can give me your opinion, right? It's not about that.
No, I won't.
But I know that you have the ability to remove yourself from emotional bias
Well, I've got no emotional attachment to this.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You have no emotional attachment
No.
to this. Okay, so when it calls for something to be clinically assessed,
Yeah.
you have the integrity to give a clinical assessment.
Look, I'm enthusiastic about it, but I'm not emotionally attached to it. You know, I enjoy it. It's a great topic, and we're going to try to cover as much as we can because we have to. But you know, we'll do our best because there's a lot to go through.
I know. That's why
Yeah.
I trust you. I can't debate on fact other than fact checking stuff. But that's the thing. I know you've done your homework, so you're one of the few people I trust the opinion of, or not even opinion, just fact of,
Yeah.
rhetoric of, without having to do the backyard. Say, I don't know.
There'll be some of my opinions in here, but they'll be backed up, you know, by historical accounts
But
or some evidence.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like I said, a lot of people have asked me about this. I'm
Yeah.
curious about it. I haven't had that much. Like, I know the
What are people asking you about exactly? What are they saying?
why, as in where did this stem from, or like there could be pro Israel or pro Hamas, or maybe not even that, just anti-Muslim or anti-Arab, or anti-Zion, and they can't differentiate the groups. They don't understand the difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing we need to the first thing that we need to talk about or mention is a lot of people don't realize that to be Jewish is an ethnic ancestry.
Yeah.
It's DNA. People think that it's a mere religion, and there's a lot of conflation there because what you have to understand is the religious component is Judaism.
Yeah.
Which is a faith-based ideology and dogma.
Yeah.
It was exclusively attached or exclusively meant to be for the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are a group of people that originate ancestrally from the Middle East. Yeah. And people don't understand that. They start talking about this group of people like they're just a mere religious group as the equivalent of Christians or Muslims. And it's not.
It's not.
It's not the same thing. I mean, it's in the sense of it's like, it's a religion that's supposed to be attached to one ethnic ancestry, like Hinduism to Indians, or Shinto to the Japanese. So that's the first thing that I think, amazingly, a lot of people don't understand.
I don't know. Like I had a bit of an understanding on that sort of concept, just based on the fact that I've got a lot of Russian, Ukrainian mates, and a lot of them are Jewish. You know what I mean? Like Russians are either mostly Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, or Jews, depending on where they're from.
Or they're not actually of Russian ancestry, but they're Jews that have immigrated there, and they've been there for so long.
They've lived in Russia for 100 years.
And they can speak Russian, and they can speak Hebrew, but they're not Russian. Not of Russian ancestry. They're Russian nationals. They might be Russian culturally to a point, but they're not of Russian ancestry. They're different.
So I want to make it clear that neither you nor I have a dog in this race. It does not matter. As in, outside of political interest and political concern, it's got nothing to do with who we want to win based on ethnicity or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah,
like neither you nor I are Jewish or Russian or Middle Eastern. Does that make sense?
Well, who knows?
Well, yeah, who does?
Unless you check the ancestry, but no. But the point is that none of us are culturally.
We don't align with either of them.
No, not at all. No.
Okay, cool. All right, so in 50 words or less.
50 words.
In 50 words or less, honestly. If you had to say, where was the starting point of this whole conflict, right? Forget the first missile launched.
Oh, we're going to go way back, son.
Yeah,
we're going to go way. We must.
Okay.
We must.
And the interesting thing is, I know that you and I have spoken about this before, and the one thing I did notice was, especially because on my social media, I noticed a bunch of people, like random friends that I have, popping up.
Yeah.
Right? And for some reason, it's been funny because a lot of the people that have been spreading the anti-COVID, conspiracy theory shit, a lot of them are all pro-Palestine all of a sudden, spreading the same shit, talking about ethnic cleansing, talking about, blah, blah, blah.
Nonsense. Yeah.
Well,
silliness. Yeah.
Be that as it may, it's been funny watching them just switch.
Well, you can see, people that say pro-inverted commas Palestine and join those interest groups are quite often all into the BLM organisation as well. And you can almost pinpoint what interest groups or topics they're going to align with, or what side of the topics they're going to align with. It's a very predictable
That's what
it's a very predictable
almost
train.
been like that.
It's a very predictable train.
Maybe look, and like I said, I'm not the best sample group to be looking at, right? I don't have 1,000 friends on Facebook. I don't have a million followers on Twitter. I don't spend all day retweeting and reading bullshit or whatever. I don't. So I'm a really shitty sample group. It's just interesting for me to be looking at my social media feed, and all of a sudden, there's people that were like pro, anti-government, anti-COVID restrictions, pro-conspiracy, disappeared for a while because their freedoms were like brought back out. And now because of this Palestinian issue, they're back on social media saying this is ethnic cleansing, this is this. I was like,
ethnic cleansing, genocide. I wish apartheid as well. I mean,
I wish I was filming this just so people could see your brain is just It's because you're picturing every woke individual. You're picturing their faces.
The wokists, the arts Kents,
exactly,
or just people that aren't informed, and the misinformation. The actual genuine ignorance, or even in some cases perhaps the willful ignorance, is astounding. I think that's partly the reason why we have to talk about this.
I was going to say, did you see the Joe Rogan clip about woke culture?
I think so.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, I do watch a lot of Rogan.
I haven't watched anything. You know how we're all part of the algorithm, so YouTube will bump up whatever you've been watching and just give you more of the same sort of shit. It's been funny, man, because I've come almost full circle with what I started watching back at the start of COVID. Yeah. So a lot of woke culture videos just based on video games and movies and shit like that. They've just started popping up again. I don't know why. But for a good chunk, it was all atheist videos and talking to theists and debunking theories and that sort of crap. Yeah. But Joe Rogan was right in the cusp of COVID, somewhere in the middle. So I haven't seen a single Joe Rogan clip for about 4 or 5 months.
It's been a while. I haven't seen much of him either lately. But
the one thing I see all of a sudden is him talking about wokists.
The wokist thing. And I've been watching a bit of Douglas Murray. Old Christopher Hitchens, who he's no longer with us.
Christopher Hitchens.
He's no longer with us, unfortunately. Yeah. But a lot of that during COVID too.
Anyway, okay, now. All right. So, if we had to pick a moment. If there was a starting point...
Yeah.
Okay, see, this is the thing. I can't even ask you that because you would go back to literally Mesopotamia.
Well, look, we've got a number of points that I think we'll mention, and then we'll go back into exploring them, I think, in greater detail.
Just Mesopotamia. That's one of your references.
Mesopotamia, yeah.
Yeah, that's a reference from you, man. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, go. Sorry.
So... I think we need to debunk some of the myths and some of the misinformation that's circulating. Because I don't think it's particularly interesting for us to sit here online and talk about how we want peace. Of course we do. We all most of the people on the planet want peace. They want to see a peaceful, ideally peaceful outcome to this situation. But that's not an interesting conversation.
No.
It's pedestrian. It's pretty simplistic and doesn't really tell us anything. And I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in having... emotionally driven discussions about this where people just dribble emotionally and give you the same standard lines, and it's not interesting.
I think the truth is, man, if it was just about peace, I mean, you'd have to iron out every situation on the planet.
Yeah, right? And then you're selective. Because people have their own interests in terms of selective interests about where they want peace, and there's a lot of instability in many parts of the world. It's not just between Israel and West Bank and Gaza. There's problems everywhere. So, look, I think we need to start off with a few points here that I'm going to bring up that we're going to talk about. First of all, I'm just going to highlight them, and then we're going to go back.
Okay.
All right? Cool. Okay. So, there's never been such a region, territory, or up to this point, a nation-state called Palestine.
Yeah.
There's never been such thing as a Palestinian people, as in a distinct ancestral indigenous group.
The way Greeks, Italians, whatever.
Chinese, Indians, etc. No. The Arab world is chiefly responsible for the issue of West Bank and Gaza today. We'll explore that. The governments of West Bank and Gaza have done nothing, really, to look after their people or to advance their people.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into some of the terms, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, the apartheid, and a few other things that I think are worth mentioning.
Okay, cool.
All right. So in terms of this place called Palestine. And I always say that in inverted commas.
Yeah.
I write it in inverted commas. I do the little signals in inverted commas because it amazes me how there is so much evidence out there, historical reference, to show us that there's never been such a place. And you get these silly hysterical maps that wokeists use. And they show you this map that says 1947, this region called Palestine, and then 1948 is Israel. That's not how it happened.
I wish everyone could see me right now because I'm actually sitting here like with my head resting on my arm.
Yeah.
I'm listening. Like this
No.
I'm getting a history lesson here.
We go back, and we have to go back to over 2,000 years. And we talked before about the Jewish people not being a mere religious group, which is to be Judaic is to be religious, to be Jewish is the ethnic ancestry. This group of people originated from this land that is now Israel, West Bank, and Gaza over 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And we must highlight what that land was called originally, its first name. It was called Judea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you had Canaanites there as well, and there was a group of people that came in from the Aegean. And under the Roman Empire, this is times of the Roman Empire, when the Romans were ruling, and they were looking for a name to call these people that came from the Aegean. And I thought, what are we going to call these people? So they went to the Greek lexicon, and they pulled out the word Philistini.
Yeah.
And they called these people the Philistines. Actually, there's absolutely no link whatsoever to Arabs. None. They are from the Aegean. So that was the first time that word had been used in that context, in that region.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how the Greeks used it way back before then, because it's irrelevant to the usage of where we're talking about this issue today.
Yeah.
So, yes, they called these people the Philistines. First time that word was used, the P word. So the second time that it was used was the Romans were trying to, I guess you could say, wipe out Jewish presence in the area, or identity, let's say. And they renamed Judea, Syria Palestina.
Right.
Right. Not Palestine, not Palestina, Syria Palestina. That was its official name.
Okay. What kind of year are we talking right now?
Roman Empire period. Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay, cool. I'll suss it out. You keep going.
Okay. So then after that, you had that land or that region had a number of spin-off names.
Yeah.
Palestina Prima, Palestina Secunda. But it was a Roman invention using the Greek language.
Yeah.
You go throughout time, we get to a point where Arab Islamists colonized Jerusalem. Yeah. So they came from the Gulf. And this is where the Arab people come from. They come from the Gulf. They do not originate from this land. And this is another fallacy that floats around, that the Palestinians in their indigenous land or territory. Well, if you want them to go back to or if you want them to be in their indigenous territory, you want them to go back to the Gulf.
Yeah.
Now, the first presence of Arabs in that region was when the Arab colonialist Islamists, and this colonialism is rarely talked about, came into Jerusalem, colonized that, and we know that was the core reason why the Pope in Rome launched the Crusades. But on they went forward, and they colonized what are the regions of Syria and Lebanon today, where they inflicted their language, their religion. They went all the way to Africa, the Barbary states, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, and Mauritania, Sudan, Somalia. I mean, does anyone ever wonder why the Sudanese are try-hard Arabs? Why they're so Arabized? And the Somalians aren't that much better? Why the top of North Africa is so culturally Arabized?
Most people don't know Sudanese speak Arabic.
Well, that's the shame of it, isn't it?
No, but it's the truth.
It's true, yeah. And the Sudanese have got such a rich, vibrant ancestry, yet they're so infatuated with Arabism, which is interesting. So,
colonialism, mate.
But it's a colonialism that people conveniently leave out when they talk about colonialism. Isn't that interesting? So you had the Arab Islamists that colonized Jerusalem. And they persecuted Christians and Jews and so forth there that weren't allowed to pray. Everyone was allowed to pray there beforehand. So they've been in this land since that point. And we continue throughout the centuries of a number of different takeovers. It was never, ever called Palestine, as in literally the land or region was never called Palestine. The Ottomans, they had that land for many centuries.
Yeah.
But we also need to mention that the Jews, as we said, originally came from this land. They were exiled twice by Romans and by Arab Islamists. The mass majority were kicked out.
Yeah.
And then we know they went to Egypt and they went to Spain and they were dispersed globally. But a minority stayed in that land. And a lot of them ended up in the regions of Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, Iran, Yemen, and North Africa too.
I feel like Yemen's always overlooked.
It is over.
in the conversation of anything, it's always overlooked.
And
it's never up the top.
It needs more attention.
Yeah, it does.
I think. So
I'm not trying to take the piss. I honestly do feel like it's never mentioned.
So, and then you had Jews and Arabs that were living on this piece of land that had no name. Under Ottoman control, it had no name. Nothing official about it. It wasn't Arab land.
Yeah.
It was at that point.
Sorry, pull this in.
Yeah. At that point, it was Ottoman under the Ottoman Empire, and they didn't give it much thought. The Ottomans. It was just a piece of land in between the Mesopotamia border and the Mediterranean Sea. Jews and Arabs, as I said, lived on it. There were more Arabs there at that time, that's true. But that was an interesting period because they lived there in relative peace.
Yeah.
Then we had World War One. Right.
Okay, so we're at the start of the century, basically. First 10 years.
We're doing that, yes. But as we've highlighted, anywhere in between, before the Ottoman Empire, anything that came before the Ottoman Empire, that land was never called Palestine.
Okay.
Syria, Palestina, Palestina Prima, Palestina Secunda, never Palestine. So then we get to, World War One. We have the War of the Empires, and the Ottoman Empire fell. And we know that the British were all over that, and they enlisted the Arab tribes in helping them defeat the Ottomans. And of course, the British made all kinds of promises to them and stabbed them in the back. Nevertheless, the Arab world got, after World War One, shortly after that, 14 independent countries. I mean, which other ancestral group can brag about having 14 independent countries? No one else. So when the Ottoman Empire fell and the British got a hold of that territory, they thought, okay, what are we going to call our new mandate? And they looked back into history to see what name it was given. So we know it was Judea in the first place, the ancestral home of the Jews. They named it Syria Palestina. All right, well, we'll take the word. And they called it British Mandate Palestine. So this map that a lot of wokists or, pro-Palestinian activists use, where they claim that this place was called Palestine in 1947, it wasn't. It was called British Mandate Palestine. And there's a big difference. It was an artificial British mandate creation. And that map kind of implies that it was somehow called Palestine to a more organic rhythm and for a very long time. And that's not the case. I think it was about 1920.
The problem is a lot of the wokists see what they see on the internet.
Yeah.
They get a meme sent to them. They see, something on Twitter.
Correct.
And that's where the depth ends.
Yeah, there's no more
JPEG,
research into it.
400 by 400. That's where it ends.
That's where it ends.
There's no more reading. That's it.
But they couldn't tell you anything about...
In 1947, it was called Palestine. That's it.
That's not true.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, man. It's only skin deep, for these people. And that's
only skin deep. So when the British had it, that was the first time that region officially had currency. There was British Mandate Palestine currency.
Yeah.
And people that lived under the British Mandate had British Mandate Palestine passports, BMP passports. Yeah. So there was a mandate identity, a British Mandate Palestine identity by default, which didn't last very long.
How long are we talking?
1920, I believe, to 1940, to 1947, 48. Yeah. That's how long the mandate lasted. So there were Jews and Arabs living there. There was no such things as Jews and Arabs and Palestinians. There were Jews and Arabs.
Yeah.
It was simple as that. Now, as you know, that there was a lot of anti-Jewish rhetoric building up in Europe. So slowly you had Jewish migrants coming back to the land that they originated from.
World War II?
No, World War One. Post World War One, coming into World War II as well.
Okay.
But there was anti-Jewish sentiment on the rise. Way before, even after World War One. So you were getting a migration that was coming through, and you remember that most of this land was deserted for centuries, and even there were Jews that were coming back under the Ottoman mandate and turning desolate wasteland into ecological wonders, agricultural wonders. So you had these two ethnic ancestries living under the British mandate. Now, the British, as always, they make promises they don't want to keep. They stab people in the back. The Balfour Declaration, there was this idea of creating a Jewish state in the land of the Jewish people's ancestry. Now, I'm a Zionist in the sense that I believe that the Jewish people have a right to a nation state, ideally in the land that they came from, in their land of origin. And I believe that for everyone.
Yeah.
For Kurds, Assyrians, whomever. I think ideally, if it can happen, it should happen. A nation state where an ethnic ancestry can be the majority, like most groups have in the world. So the British had this idea. I mean, they thought about putting them in Uganda. The Jews in Uganda.
Jews?
Yeah, Jewish state part of Uganda. That was on the list. They even thought of Tasmania. They thought of cutting off a piece of Germany. There were all these ideas up in the air.
Uganda.
You could imagine what would have happened. There would have been exactly. So
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, there was talk about that. But the Arabs that were living on that land were not to be disadvantaged. That was the plan, and ideally that would have been great. So you had two partition plans that were put on the table. But before we get to those partition plans, you got to realize that there began a great deal of civil unrest between the Jews and the Arabs in British Mandate Palestine.
Yeah.
You had the Grand Mufti of British Mandate Palestine, who was in league with Hitler, who was Hitler's mouthpiece. And there's photo documentation and evidence of their allegiance because they both shared a common ideology.
Yeah, kill Jews.
Kill Jews, the ideology of Islam and the ideology of Nazism, to persecute Jews. So he became Hitler's mouthpiece throughout the Middle East, or the Nazi mouthpiece throughout the Middle East and North Africa. And he initiated a great deal of persecution against the Jewish minority in that region from about 1915 onwards. And that intensified. And then you had a great deal of civil unrest not only between the Jews and the Arabs, between the Arabs and the British, and the Jews and the British. There were little terror organizations on both sides attacking each other and attacking the British as well. So eventually the British pulled out. And we're going to continue on what happened there in point 3. But I want to bring back something else I mentioned before about Palestinian people, this idea of a Palestinian people. As we said, there is no difference between the people we call or they call Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, yet the people over the fence that are Arabs in Israel. It's funny, isn't it? The Arabs in Israel are called Arabs, and then over the fence they magically become Palestinian. There's no difference. Yeah. And there's no difference between them and the wider Arab world. As we said, the Arabs originate from the Gulf. They spread through the Middle East. They spread to North Africa with Islamist colonialism, and they ended up in that region. So there's never been such a thing as a distinct ancestral Palestinian people. They're Arabs. Now, we're going to get to that point as well when we talk about what the Arab world had done from 1948 onwards. And part of that is the Palestinian identity that was carved out. So as we go on, the civil unrest continued between the British, the Jews and the Arabs. And the British just got fed up with the mess that they had largely created there, and they pulled out. Mind you, we had two partition plans on the table. The partition plan of Mr. Churchill in 1922 and the partition plan of the UN in 1947.
Okay.
With the objective of the Arabs having a 15th state and the Jews having one. And the Jews were to get somewhat more land, but that made sense because it was not just for the Jews that live there currently, it was going to be for the Jews of the future as well, because it was going to be the one designated projected growth, absolutely.
We're making this the epicenter of Judaism because this is whatever.
And the Jews were happy to share this land. They said yes to two partition plans even before Israel existed. And the Arabs said no, because they didn't want to share. Now, I wish they had said yes. The UN partition plan was quite fair, but no, they weren't interested. They wanted the land completely to themselves. Now, they couldn't see, and they didn't have the
foresight? Well,
they didn't even have the scope to realize that, they have 14 other countries. And yes, I'm not saying that these Arabs didn't have some kind of claim to land, the people that had been living there for centuries. I don't deny that. I was up for the idea, and I'm still up for the idea of a two-state solution. It would have been far easier back then for them to have been accommodated. Now it's a lot more difficult.
Now they got Wi-Fi contracts. You know what I mean?
It would have been far easier for them to do it back then,
yeah.
but they said no. They didn't. Again, it goes back to the stubborn tribal kind of mentality of we don't want to compromise and we don't want to share. We want this all to ourselves. So 1948, British pull out, and Israel, the Jews, start setting up their state. They've had enough too. You know, it's interesting. There was an interesting comment by Golda Meir.
Oh, your favourite.
One of my favourites. Just after the 6-Day War, but before the Yom Kippur War, when Joe Biden was with her, and he was a senator, obviously, back then. And she said he was very nervous because the Yom Kippur War was about to begin, but she was quite calm and collected. And she said, "Don't worry, Senator, we have a secret weapon in our war, our conflict against the Arabs." And he said to her, "Well, what is it?" And she said, "We have no place left to go." So it almost like they'd done full circle. They'd been kicked out of their ancestral home. They'd been dispersed globally, being minorities all around the world with no nation state, no piece of soil, let's say, to call their own where they can be the majority. And finally, they were back in their homeland, setting up this state. Now, you had the 5 Arab countries of Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi, and Iraq attack. So you went from civil unrest between the Arabs, the Jews, and the British to a full-blown scale war initiated by the 5 Arab nations. Now, why did they attack? They didn't attack to protect or to help their own people who were in a very tricky spot, the Arabs and British Mandate Palestine. No, they attacked to try to eradicate Jews from the region and to land grab, to try to steal or to take as much land as they possibly
Just
could.
a clean and sweep.
A clean sweep, and they said to the Arabic people, well, you can leave your homes, we'll be done soon, and you can come back, pretty much. And it didn't quite work out that way. So what you had there was Israel taking about 50 or 60%, if I'm correct, more land than what the UN partition plan of 47 had outlined for them. But this is what happens in times of war. People collect land.
Get what you get.
You get what you get. Because of the war that the 5 Arab states initiated, you had a mass spillage of Arab refugees from British Mandate Palestine. You had refugees that were left for decades, and I think they're still there languishing in refugee camps, not absorbed by the Arab world, with the exception of Lebanon. Now, most of the Arab world didn't bother to take in these refugees, and it's their own people. That's what really stings me, is that they couldn't be bothered lifting a finger to help their own people in need. Lebanon took in a great amount, but they also lived to regret that, because that intake of Arabs from British Mandate Palestine tipped the very equal balance they had of Sunnis, Shiites, Christian Maronites, and Druze. And it gave what would become the PLO their headquarters for exploiting extremism and terrorism. It gave birth to Hezbollah because of the issues with the Sunnis had with the Shiites, and it was the catalyst for the Lebanese civil war. So the more mess that Lebanon is in today is literally because of that refugee intake.
If the numbers of the refugees had been equally sort of dispersed among the other 14 Arab nations,
they might have been better off.
Sunnis may have gone to where Sunnis are predominant. Shiites would have probably found pockets where.
Well, the Shiites are predominant in Iraq.
Yeah,
they're predominant in Bahrain. Even though the royal family there is, or the leaders there are Sunni, which is interesting. Lebanon lived to regret it. Now, another funny thing, you ask a lot of these people that we're talking about, these wokists or whatever, you ask them who took Gaza in 1948 and who took West Bank in 1948. They say Israel, which is wrong.
Yeah.
They did not. Egypt took Gaza and Jordan annexed the West Bank. Israel had no interest in those two territories whatsoever. And the other interesting thing is, and this is another fact that a lot of people don't know about, in 1948, Israel, the supposed enemy nation, took in over 45,000 Arab refugees from British Mandate Palestine and gave them equal rights and citizenship. That's why there's so many Arabs living there. within the borders of Israel.
So they repopulated the own.
Well, and isn't it astounding that the so-called enemy nation took in all these refugees, yet the Arab world couldn't be bothered looking after its own people? And then another interesting fact that happened in 1948 was the expulsion of Jews from Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Syria, Libya, Egypt. They were kicked out because of what happened with the setup of Israel in 1948. And no one seems to be interested in the plight of those refugees. They don't matter. So a lot of them went to Israel, and that was a tough gig for Israel. I mean, you're a brand new country. You're taking in Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, which are culturally very, very different to the Jews that have come from Europe. And then you have the Arab population that you've taken in as well. So you could imagine that would have been quite an interesting
What do you reckon the main differences are of, like, say, culturally between the Jews of, say, Eastern Europe or whatever, or Western Europe, where they would have been further persecuted? Yeah. They weren't persecuted in Eastern Europe. Well, not to the degree they would have been in the West.
Well, there were the pogroms. There was persecution in Russia, for example.
Yeah.
With the Cossacks and such. But I think, the difference would be is that, the Jews of Europe that came from Europe would be more so culturally European. And then there would have been an inevitable cultural clash to a degree. They wouldn't have understood each other. I mean, imagine the one thing that they would have shared was religion.
Yeah, language would have been different.
Yeah, unless
to a degree,
unless any of the ones in the Middle East kept the Hebrew, and probably some of them did. But imagine the Jews of Yemen coming into contact with the Jews of Germany or the Jews that came from Austria.
Yeah,
the only thing they would have been sharing would have been religion.
Everyone over Punt Road, kind of High Street.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't even know my cousins up in Preston, man. They're different. They're a different breed of Greeks.
So this is what happened. So from 1948 to 1966, just before the 7-Day War, you had Egypt ruling Gaza with an iron fist and leaving it an absolute squalor, and you had Jordan annex the West Bank. Now, at that point, Gaza was the only real problem. I mean, why are you leaving your own people like this, Arab world? Absorb them. They should have absorbed them. And they should have absorbed the Arabs that were in refugee camps as well that had been left in limbo. The issue of West Bank wasn't a problem because the Arabs that were on the west of the Jordan River were now on the east of the Jordan, in Transjordan, or formerly Transjordan, now Jordan, and they were happy. I mean, they were the majority living there. They're in government. They're in parliament. They're all over it. They were happy people. There was no, and if you notice that there was no call for a 15th state called Arab state called Palestine or anything else from 48 till 67. No interest whatsoever. 1967, stupidly.
Your face just there,
yeah,
man.
I know. Stupidly, the Syria, Jordan, and Egypt attacked Israel again. They thought that Israel was preparing some kind of launch against them, but it was the Arab states that attacked first, and they had heavy amounts of artillery. They had been heavily funded by Soviet Union. Egypt was using many Soviet tanks. But because we know that this world is so internally divided and fractured and they don't like each other and they don't trust each other and so tribal, they couldn't organize a route in a brothel, let alone a successful military operation against Israel. So what happened? They lost again. So they lost Gaza. Jordan lost West Bank, which was terrible. Syria lost the Golan Heights, and on top of it, Egypt lost Sinai. So Israel pretty quickly gave back the Golan Heights to Syria and gave back the Sinai to Egypt. But a little prior to that, you had Yasser Arafat and co, building up their organization, which was to become the PLO, and they were carving out this identity that they wanted to utilize, which went into full force when they lost Gaza and West Bank as PR for the world. Now we want a 15th state. Now that we've lost this, now we want another piece of land that we can call our own. And then this whole thing about wanting another state started coming up again post 67, and that's when the Palestinian identity really became a thing. It was really carved out at that point. And it was used as PR to try to differentiate the people that lived in West Bank and Gaza from Arabs, to make them seem a little bit more unique, to make it seem more of an attractive, campaign for the world, which Arafat later on freely admitted, no, they're Arabs. We're all Arabs. We're all one phase. Yeah. But there was that attempt to differentiate them.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Just to make it more palatable, basically.
Palatable for PR, I think, to make it seem different. And you had, Israel occupying Gaza and West Bank at one point. They no longer do occupy it. They keep a very, very close eye on them. There's a lot of security, and they protect themselves as anyone would protect their borders. And it's interesting that, just about any other group can protect their borders, but Israel looks after their borders, and all of a sudden it's a problem. So you have that explanation, and I've tried to sum it up as best as I can as to why there's never been such a region or territory, or up to this point a nation state called Palestine, why there is no such thing as a distinct ancestral Palestinian people, and why the Arab world is responsible. There's going to touch a little bit more on the governments of West Bank and Gaza, because I think that's an important thing to mention as well. So over time you've had a succession of governments in these two territories that can't even get along with each other. Surprise, surprise. let alone Israel. So you've had Fatah and Hamas in Gaza, and it's even been worded that Israel had funded Hamas in order to fight the PLO, because the PLO was a big problem at the time.
Okay, for the people at home, PLO is what exactly?
The Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was started up by Yasser Arafat and co., which set up their head office in Lebanon, which is why Israel went in there in 1982 to clean them out, because they were causing a lot of trouble in southern Lebanon, and most of the Lebanese were sick to death of them, obviously, and they were attacking Israel from the south, so they went in there to clean them out. So you had the PLO, you had the Palestinian Authority. One other point I want to mention as well, we'll just go back to the UN named these two territories in 2013 the State of Palestine. So people try to use that and go, there is a place called this. It's ultimately a silly title. It's a pander. It's a concession, which doesn't equate to anything. They've called them the State of Palestine because, as I said, it's a sympathy card play. That gives them nothing. It does not make them a sovereign state.
Do you know how many times I've had arguments on two things that you would know a lot about? The former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia.
Yeah. Oh, Lord. Yeah.
The Northern Republic of Cyprus.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. They're not sovereign.
They're nothing.
Well, the former Yugoslavia Republic is a sovereign state, but the Northern Cyprus itself, is not.
But Cyprus, it was there for... It wasn't officially not recognised by anyone.
It's not recognised by anyone except Turkey and Pakistan, I believe. Now, this 2013 UN declaration is superficial because they don't have...
Pull this down. Just pull it down.
Like that?
Yeah, it's
Yep. Okay, they don't have equal rights in the UN like sovereign states do.
Yeah.
The declaration itself doesn't make them a sovereign state, and they do not even remotely meet the criteria of being a sovereign state.
Yeah.
So it's a useless title. They throw that at you. You know what to say, pretty much. So we go back to the succession of governments that the West Bank and Gaza have had. Fatah, Hamas in Gaza, the PLO and the PA, for example, in West Bank. Now, these territories have been given so much money in aid over the decades, both by the Islamic world, in particular Iran has very well funded them, Turkey's funded them, and the West, we in the West have funded them. Now, what have they done with all these hundreds and millions of dollars over time? Now, I know it's not an ideal situation to be in, but they've got an 80k stretch in Gaza. That's how long Gaza is. And they had the West Bank. Now, you'd think with all that money that they would actually try to innovate. They would try to build at least workable, livable societies for their people. They haven't done it. They haven't bothered to do it. They don't care about their people. And this is a mentality that you'll find in the Islamic world and in the Arabic world, particularly amongst, and I'm not talking about, and I want to make this clear, I'm not talking about every single Arabic or Islamic person might not feel this way, but the mentality of the overall collective, and certainly in governments and leaders, they don't value life. There's a great deal of investment in life after death. They think the next life is going to be oh so much more wonderful. So there's great investment in that. So they don't invest and care in the present life.
I've said that about theists generally, about there's an investment in the afterlife as opposed to valuing what we actually have now. It's an argument. It's a conversation we had another day.
Yeah,
but I've said that with the Islamic world, it's like on overdrive.
It's on overdrive because there's much greater value for life itself in Judaism and Christianity.
Yeah.
In valuing the present. In Islam, there is not, and that's filtered into the Arabic world. So they live to die, pretty much. That's the mentality of this life investment in life after death. So if you don't value your own life, how the hell can you value anyone else's? So you can see that in that there's no value for life in these territories amongst their governments. So what do they spend this money on? They spend it on importing terrorism and extremism. They invest it in weaponry. They invest it in building tunnels. None of it has really gone to creating long-standing, workable, livable societies. They haven't bothered to innovate or anything like that, which is a great shame. Now, they could have done that by now, but they haven't done it. And on top of it, they use child soldiers. They use citizens as human shields, because if you don't value life, it's okay, and then you can dangle it up to the world and use it as PR. Now, they don't even do simple things like have, like air shelters for their citizens. Israel does. I mean, they've invested. I mean, I know that the dome is quite an elaborate mechanism. It's wonderful.
It's crazy.
But even to the basics, they've got air shelters. They've got places where people can go to when Hamas and co are firing rockets. The territories of West Bank and Gaza don't do that. And there's a very good argument there as to why there are so many more casualties on one side as there are on the other. Because one side invests in the life of their people, where the other side does not. And there was a very interesting protest on the border of Gaza and Israel not too long ago, a few years ago. And Hamas had been prepping up their people to riling them up, to penetrate the border zone, to go in there and start trouble. And that's what happened. They penetrated the border zone. You had Arabs from Gaza heading towards Israel, bricks, stones, knives, Molotov cocktails, whatever they could get their hands on. Now, Israel was good enough to fire tear gas. Lucky they didn't cop bullets. Now, the tear gas was involved in the death of an 8-month-old, of an infant. Now, when that infant died, so many people going, oh my God, look at what Israel did, the barbarians, the killers, they killed this child. No one asked the more interesting question, in my opinion, which was, why was an 8-month-old baby at a border zone protest between Israel and Gaza? Why was that baby there? Furthermore, why was that baby in the arms of its uncle? The mother was nowhere to be seen. Shouldn't an 8-month-old be in the arms of its mother, with its parents, in its home, which was probably, 30, 40, 50, 20 Ks away from that border zone? No one asked that question, which was interesting. Now, in my opinion, that baby was taken there deliberately by its uncle to be killed, probably on the blessing of the parents, because then you'd have a martyred baby on your hand. And what an honour to have a martyred baby die for the cause.
Really makes no fucking sense.
No, it doesn't. But this is the type of mentality that we're dealing with, and that has to be recognised. So these are some questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves. Why are there less casualties on one side than another? We went through, and I'm hoping that I explained it adequately, because it's a dense topic, as to why there's never been such a region or territory, or up to this point a nation-state called Palestine, and why there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. Now, the Trump administration had put a peace plan on the table a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how much Donnie was in that peace plan. I don't know.
He basically said his son-in-law Kushner onto it.
Okay, well then
He took a Jew and said, "Yeah,
took a Jew." Well, then the Jew did a pretty good job. I mean, I read it. I don't think the Arab governments of West Bank and Gaza bothered to read it. I thought it was a pretty fair solution.
I never saw it.
Okay, so I'll explain it. What you had there was the opportunity for these two territories to become one sovereign state. They can finally be a sovereign state. The Arab world will have a 15th country, and they can call themselves Palestine or whatever they want. Now, I don't recognize that word Palestine because there's nothing valid on the table in order for me to recognize that word.
Yeah.
But if they did agree to that plan, then at least they would have a national identity by virtue of sovereign state, in the same way Pakistan does, or in the same way that there's such a thing as an Emirati or a Saudi or a Kuwaiti by virtue of nation state, by nationality. Then we'll agree to that. Now, this plan was to connect the two territories via underpasses and underground tunnels, under heavy security, of course, so that's the reality of it. But the beautiful thing about it would be that they would bring a new one government to the table, democratically elected, of course. The Arabs that are in West Bank could finally see the ocean. They could connect with the Arabs in Gaza. They could get together with family again. They could innovate. They could cultivate.
Yeah.
There's no limit to what they could do. They put their heads together and they start building a workable, livable society. They had that chance. This is not the first time that they've had a chance for a separate state. There's been a number of occasions post-1948 that they've rejected. And as we demonstrated, the Churchill Plan of 22 and the UN Partition Plan of 47, before Israel existed, they've had plenty of chances to have that 15th Arab state, and they've said no. So I don't...
When they say no, what does it come down to? Just size of land? Generally, yes, the part of it has been size of land and the fact that they just don't want to share. I mean, prior to 48, the partition plans had more land to the Jews. But as I understood that as being, well, it's forecasting, for a population that'll grow, for Jews for all over the world to come to, and for birth rates and the rest of it. And also considering the fact that the Arabs have vast territory already in 14 countries. Yeah.
Already. So I think that in that case...
as states. As
sovereign states.
We're not talking about a neighbourhood like downtown,
No, we're talking about 14... exactly.
Yeah.
Immense territories. So that was what was interesting to me, is to see every single peace plan or partition plan be rejected. So... I have to say that I obviously do have sympathy for the people, for the Arabs that live in West Bank and Gaza. I mean, what a shitty deal they've gotten. And to be rejected by your own world, I mean, that would hurt if you were aware of the rejection. And that's the funny thing. I think most of these people, if you look at the evidence, have been conditioned to think that the Jews put them in this place, and it's Israel's fault that they are the way that they are, and that it's just astounding to me that they are not able to see. But I guess a succession of brainwashing of generations will do that.
Look, man, it's all selective history, basically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, there are freaking, even in America now, Trump was pushing an agenda, and the South is still pushing the agenda of not teaching, teaching history, US history, to include things about slavery.
Exactly.
Germany, right after World War II, made it illegal to have anything to do with Nazis.
Yeah.
No mention of them.
No mention of them whatsoever, yes.
No displays of the icons, or not even a museum. They're like barely making it to museums.
Definitely.
You can't just pretend like it never happened.
No. And the
Japan's like that too.
Yeah.
They never wanted to admit that their emperor surrendered.
Hirohito.
Yeah. Dude, surrendering is just not in the Japanese ethos.
Oh, no, it's a disgrace.
Yeah. They take death. They take suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
That.
So this is the thing, is that the people in these territories of West Bank and Gaza can't see that it's the Arab world that created the refugee spillage from British Mandate Palestine. They didn't take their own people in. They didn't absorb their own people when they needed to be absorbed, with the exception of Lebanon. They left Gaza in squalor and abject poverty. And they stupidly lost 2 territories, West Bank and Gaza, when they stupidly attacked Israel again in 67. And if you think about it, if they hadn't have done that, West Bank would still be with Jordan, and Egypt hopefully would have absorbed Gaza by this point. They would have thought of a more humane and sensible way of dealing with Gaza and the people that live in Gaza.
Yeah.
And we also highlighted the Arafat campaign in the 60s, which created this, Palestinian identity. Look throughout history. You'll never find a group of people called Palestinians.
Yeah.
Prior to the 60s, when he carved that out. British Mandate Palestine doesn't count. A British invention that was given to Arabs and Jews that were living in that mandate from about 1920 to 47. And then prior to that, nothing. Nothing at all. Just Jews and Arabs. That was it. Now, another thing that I want to mention, and this is a criticism of Israel, is the ongoing land acquisition of the West Bank. I think that's got to stop. And I've always been very...
Okay. Take that from the top. Just for... You got to assume that I know nothing, and people listening don't know anything.
Okay, so over many decades, Israel has been encroaching onto the West Bank. Encroaching.
What a word.
It's a good word.
It's a very good
and they've been taking more and more land and for Jews to live on. Now, eventually, what point is that land acquisition going to stop?
Okay. When you say land acquisition, are we picturing people with witches' hats that just keep setting the border forward, or are we picturing stormed invasions of, like, suburbs?
Well, not so much stormed invasions, no, but it's kind of like, okay, well, they take a plot of land that's how many kilometres, long, let's say, and wide, and they take it for themselves, and they build homes there for Jews.
So we're talking undeveloped land, basically.
Undeveloped, or it could even be developed. It could be both.
Okay, so if you had to equate it to, say, Melbourne, are you talking about literally people walking into, say, Broadmeadows and just saying, everyone out? This is now Israeli-owned?
To a degree.
Okay. No,
to a degree.
I'm not taking the piss. I'm just saying.
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, there have been cases of that, yeah. And that's, even though you might think that from what I've said, and obviously, inevitably, people are going to think I'm pro-Israeli, and in some ways I am, yes. In some ways I am. But I'm also objective. I'll call myself an objective nationalist, for example, of Australia, of Greece. And when I say that, it simply means that I can be objective of these nation states, even though they're very close to my heart and I love them. I can do that for any nation state. I can commend them when I think they're right and criticize them when I think they're wrong. And I think, I've commended Israel a great deal, but this is one of the...
Completely off topic.
Yeah.
We mentioned it before, the former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia.
Yeah.
Greeks gave them the name Northern Republic, the North Macedonia.
Yeah.
Do you think that was right or wrong? In your opinion, we both know the history. I've explained the history before on this podcast.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a smart move or a dumb move?
Well, look, I don't particularly like them using that word.
I hate them for that.
But it's a Greek word, Makedono. It's not a Slavic Bulgarian word.
But the Greeks sold out.
They did.
They just sold out.
They did.
Like, all right. Here's a price tag, sort it out.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'd rather it not be that way.
Exactly.
I'd rather them come up with, and I don't particularly like the name of their airport either.
That burns me every day, man.
Yeah, no. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have them using the M word.
Exactly. The N word.
The M word.
We would never have. We would never have allowed it. You know?
No, but that is largely a fault of Tito.
Yeah.
For example, for really twisting these people's sense of identity by giving them a false sense of identity.
Same way Arafat did with the PLO.
Exactly. The same way that Arafat gave these Arabs a false identity for the PR. But as I said to you before, the Arabs in Israel are just called Arabs, and then you just hop over the fence and they're called Palestinians. Yeah. And it makes no sense, because the implication of that identity is that it's far more than skin deep.
Here's a question. I'm just thinking about it now, and it's interesting because I actually don't know what the answer would be. We mentioned colonialism, right? And an identity born out of nothing, basically. Yeah. We're Australian.
Correct.
Our identity was forged based on the colonial
the British Empire.
Of the British Empire.
Yeah.
So then how do we sit in that spectrum in regards to, say, the Indigenous Australians?
Well, it's very different to, and this is
It's different.
Well, absolutely, because the Jews, I mean, if you're talking about the Jews in that land, that's where the Jews came from.
Yeah, but that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
we don't come from this land.
We don't even come from this land.
No, we don't come from this, so it's different. And as I always say when it comes to the Jews, they're acute. This is the thing I mentioned quickly, is a lot of wokists, because they don't like Jews. And the reason they don't like Jews, it's a very simple equation. Jews equals wealth, so equals dollar signs, equals capitalism.
More money than you.
Yeah, exactly. But they're very good at money management. They've been money lenders from way back. The Romans gave them the coin to manage, because the Romans were hopeless at it. So they see Jews equals wealth, equals capitalism, equals Israel, little Israeli flag there, equals a white-skinned colonialist state. That's all they've got in their heads. All this history that we've gone through, they know none of it. None of it whatsoever. Now, my argument there is you can't colonize your own land. You can't colonize the land that you came from originally. And literally, yes, you can colonize colonizers, but at the end of the day, why were Arabs in this land in the first place? Because Arab colonialist Islamists colonized Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And they've been in that territory ever since. They've been there for a very long time. I don't doubt it. I'm not saying they don't have any right to say we've been here for centuries, we deserve a piece of this land. I was more than okay with Churchill's partition plan and the UN's partition plan, and this idea of, a 15th Arab state called Palestine. So I'm not, people say to me, so you don't want them to exist in that land at all. I've never said that. What I'm saying is that all the points I've mentioned need to be remembered and need to be highlighted because of all the misinformation and ignorance out there.
Yeah.
And more than happy to share. Always, I never ever would have approved of the idea of disadvantaging the Arabs that were living on that land or throwing them out.
Yeah.
But I'm all for a Jewish state in the land of Jewish ancestry. So, with this whole thing about, say, the Australia and the Indigenous, yeah, it's a good point that you've made, because
I'm just thinking about it abstractly right now, because we both fall into that category. And we fall into an even trickier category because we've experienced racism in the country that we were born in, that our parents came to as free citizens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? My mother came on the migration program in the 70s. She was paid by the Australian government to come here.
Yeah, they needed her. Well, they needed them. They needed them.
They needed them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So when I experience racism in this country, it's like, fuck off, man. I know what my roots are.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole damn world's racist, though, isn't it? Yeah, you cop it. You cop it everywhere. Interesting. When I saw the free inverted commas Palestine march in the city, I saw Aboriginal flags being waved about.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that.
That was just silly, bloody nonsense. I mean, and I know some people saying, but they're just showing solidarity and unity. It's a silly argument. What I think is going on there is that they're waving these flags around because they're saying, and a lot of Irish have got this stupid nonsense in their head too. I've heard it from the Irish too.
Yeah, I've heard it from a few Irish guys.
But also remember that the IRA and the PLO were very buddy-buddy. And they helped each other out.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, shall we say, funding between the two of them and support. The Irish and I'm hoping not the Aboriginals, but maybe a few of them at that march, seem to think that their plight with the English is the same as the plight of the Arabs in West Bank and Gaza.
Hang on. Isn't the Irish-English conflict come down to religion?
No, the Irish-English conflict was more about the occupation of Ireland by the British. So that was more land. It was just more.
I'm thinking about
imperialism.
Irish and Northern Ireland. Sorry.
Okay, Northern. That's not a religious conflict. It just so happens that one side is predominantly Catholic and one side is predominantly Protestant. But that's more to do with culture and land. It's more to do with the idea of whether we remain a part of the United Kingdom or whether we become our own separate republic. And that's the issue. That's the Northern Ireland issue, when you have that separatism, whether you want to stay unified or whether you want to be separate. So there's no equivalence between the plight of the Aboriginals and the Irish and the Arabs in West Bank and Gaza. Again, these two groups, and I'm hoping the Aboriginals don't have it in their head at this point, but who knows? These two groups think that, the Arabs are indigenous to this territory and have been, either tossed out or occupied by Jewish settlers.
When history shows that it's not the case.
It's not the case whatsoever. Now, another thing that we need to make clear is I've been noticing a lot of nonsensical usage of the word apartheid.
Yeah.
You hear the term, Israel is an apartheid state. All right, so let's talk about that. Now, that term was invented for South Africa.
That's the first thing I think of.
Correct. It hadn't been used prior to that. Now, we know that South Africa at that point was a segregated nation, and segregated up to the highest level of mandated state-based law, where black-skinned Africans had unequal rights, as opposed to the Dutch colonialists and the ancestors to the Dutch colonialists had unequal rights. They couldn't share the same spaces, the same public arenas.
Yeah, just segregated.
There was complete segregation. Now, how does that idea even get legs when it comes to Israel? First of all, within the nation state of Israel, they have equal legal rights. They have more or less equal legal rights. They have the ability to vote. There are Arab high court judges. There are Arabs in Israeli parliament, in Israeli government. They have the rights of law, the same rights of law and protection. Admittedly, it is a little bit more difficult for Arabs to buy land in certain parts.
Yeah, but they're not
of
seen
Israel.
as a second-class
No,
citizen.
they're not. No, it is a little bit more difficult. But from a lot of my research, that I found out that there seems to be this big middleman that buys up so much land, a Jewish middleman that buys up land in Israel and then rents it out, or either sells on it, but more often rents it out to Jews as well. So a lot of Jews don't even own land there, interestingly enough. Now, Jews and Arabs can use the same public transport, they can go to the same cinemas, they can use the same beaches, they can go to the same restaurants and bars and clubs. There's no difference. Now, in South Africa, there were separate beaches for black skinned Africans. There were separate movie houses. There were separate restaurants.
Can I ask?
That doesn't exist in Israel.
This term of apartheid, where have you been seeing it spruik up in Australian media?
Yes, in Australian. Well, I've seen Australian people use it.
Yeah.
In articles on social media, opinion pieces. But even The Guardian, which we know is wokest rot for most of the time, not even they're stupid enough to say that.
You know what, man?
Because that argument can be easily blown out. And then people say to me, okay, but what about West Bank? What about the apartheid involving West Bank and Gaza? First of all, West Bank and Gaza are not within the nation state of Israel. West Bank and Gaza are autonomous regions that, yes, are heavily monitored by Israel because they have to monitor because those nations have been sworn to kill them.
Yeah.
They have their own autonomous governments. Have we forgotten about Hamas and the PA? So it's a silly argument. You can't say that these territories are under an apartheid via Israel when they're not even within the borders of Israel and when they've got their own governments running those territories.
But I know the difference.
It's a silly argument to make.
I think, I started thinking about it. I mean, why? It always happens with Australians as well. Like, Australians seem to buy into it really quickly.
Yeah.
Like, all this sort of stuff, right? And we love the story of the little battler. Like, we're a nation of little battlers. Yeah, and it's fine. We always back for the underdog.
We love the underdog.
Yeah, we do. It's just being Aussie. Yeah, we love it. Getting on top of the almighty machine. But I started thinking about it, man, and I really think it plays into the fact that we're that isolated to the rest of the world. We are so far away, man. The average layperson in Australia has got no idea what Gaza is, no idea who the Israelis are, no idea what Jews are outside of, going to Balaclava and Ripponlea and seeing them walk around.
Well, we just said that they think that they're a mere religious group and there's nothing more to them.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's because we're so far isolated from all this shit. We'll never understand what it's like to wake up to rockets flying into our bedrooms.
We had no idea about that whatsoever. And I've tried to have conversations with many Australians, and I've said to them, okay, well, this piece of land that we're debating, what was it originally called? I don't know. It was called Judea. Who renamed it, and what did they rename it? I don't know. They didn't know that it was the Romans, and they didn't know the Romans renamed it Citia Palestina, and that piece of land had the spin-off titles from Citia Palestina all the way down to centuries under the Ottoman occupation or the Ottoman Empire, when it was just a piece of soil between the Mediterranean Sea and the Mesopotamia border. You tell them this, and they've got no clue. They've got no idea whatsoever. They also think that Jews come from Europe. They don't come from Europe.
Yeah.
They ended up in Europe. There's a big difference. And I remember having this debate with relatives, or people that are married to relatives, one Easter. They go to me, no, they come from Europe. No, they don't. Okay, look at who we're commiserating today. Jesus Christ, or we're celebrating his rising. What was he? Oh, he was a Jew. Did he come from Europe? No, he didn't, did he? He was from the Middle East. Correct. And how long ago was he around? Well over two. Yes, exactly right. So then what does that tell you about where the Jews came from and what region? Okay. So it's a stuff like that. The Jesus thing is a simple way to discuss it with them, particularly during Easter.
Dude, most Greeks don't know what Easter is, man.
Yeah.
They don't. I got in the biggest argument with my auntie on Easter. It was, dude... Like, this is the thing, okay? If you want to suspend, reality, and you want to suspend logical thought and have faith-based opinions, so be it. I don't give a shit. Like, that's fine. But do not debate things you have no idea about, okay? And do not come at me with faith representing fact. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't substitute faith for fact.
No.
You can't do that.
No.
And I literally stood up at 2 a.m. and just said, I'm going home. I was ready.
The only time that you can use faith as fact is if you're directly referencing doctrines and dogma, and you're saying it's a fact that these ideologies are in this faith-based system. That's the only time.
No, that's a fact.
That's a fact. Yeah, that's a fact that this ideology claims this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no.
You can't.
No.
And it's just like, I can respect you I can respect that you have these faith-based opinions.
Yeah.
But you can't make them fact just because you say so. It doesn't work like that. And I just got into this whole thing, man.
And also the idea of solutions, I think, is interesting to me. Because, okay, I didn't invent the solution of the last peace plan, obviously.
Yeah.
But I read through it and I thought it was pretty damn good. And I back that as a solution. That they should have, if they only bothered to read it, they could have seen the sense behind it. They're not going to get a better deal. Now, what else? This is another thing. Let's think reality. How are you going to, you can't, think of the logistics. You can't move these people around. Do you know what I mean? How are you going to move them? You can't move them around. You literally have to work with the land that you've got, which is why I want Israel to stop encroaching on the West Bank and taking more land, because what are you going to do? I mean, what are they going to be left with? The idea is that we want these people to have a workable, livable society so they can get past, all their differences, hopefully with the generations, but with the way that they're raised, who knows? But the idea is that we want them to build workable, livable societies. We want them to get, leave the past in the past and move on, because there's literally nowhere else that they can go. You can't just physically pick them up and place them somewhere else. It's impossible. So we need to think realistically here and practically, which is why I support the idea of connecting these two territories via underpasses and overpasses. Make them a sovereign state, 15th Arab nation, democratic one government, and let's get to work to building workable, livable societies. Now, I've been accused of being an Arab hater, which is not true. I've been accused of many things because of my stance on this topic. I can't see any anti-Arab sentiment in me. What I can see is a great deal of criticism of the Arab world and its mentality. I don't think that's a problem. That doesn't make me anti-Arab people. The Arab world is problematic in the way that it's run, in the way the Arab tribes, which are now Arab governments, the way that they interact, not only with the rest of the world, but with each other.
I think with 14
at this point.
14 states.
Yeah.
And that amount of resources.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That the rest of the world is trying to get their hands on. Clearly. They've done that well keeping out invaders.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They've done that well when they're actually on a united front of any kind, you'd think they would have been able to coordinate something.
You'd think that they would be able, and you know what? I think they've realised now they've got to start innovating elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because if the West stops taking their oil and sources it elsewhere, they're screwed. If it wasn't for their oil and gas reserves, I said they'd still be living in the Stone Age, in tents and caves. I mean, it's the reality of it. That was what gave them the wealth and the resources to build, their societies.
Yeah.
And Israel doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, for what they give the world. I mean, look at how advanced they are with science, medicine, technology. Look at what they give the world via that.
I was going to say, based on where they're located, they're very liberal, and very forward. See, this is the other thing, man. People see Israel as Jews, which equates to Orthodox Jews that they see in Balaclava and Rip and Lee.
Yeah, the hysterical, paranoid Hasidics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the same way with Muslims, right? How they see one Muslim who may be just, they could be living in Turkey. If you go to Izmir in Turkey, it's like you're in Athens.
Yeah.
Like you're in Athens, man. I was there for, I don't know, about 4 or 5 days or something, 4 days, I can't remember. And it looks exactly like Athens. It's cobblestone streets next to a port, you know what I mean? Beachside. There are restaurants everywhere. There's alcohol being poured. You don't feel like you're in some Muslim state. You know what I mean?
No, and Turkey has been liberal for a long time up until Erdogan came into power, and he's dragging them back.
Taking them back.
He's taking them back, and he's an Islamist.
Yeah.
So there's going to be problems there. But it's all, as we said, it's the medicine, it's the science, it's the technology that Israel gives the world. Also the intellectualism that comes out of it, the arts. I mean, what does the Arab world give us? What does the Arab world give the world? I mean, nothing. And you can't really say that it's for lack of resources and wealth. I mean, look at the exorbitant wealth in the Gulf. What do they give to the world? What do they give us in terms of innovations in medicine and science?